We're now live. Welcome, everyone. So happy to have you here today. I'm joined by Vladimir. Hi, Vladimir. Great to have you.
Hi, Rod. Hi, everybody.
And
Thank you for having me.
yeah, no, it's fantastic. So it's really good because we have an amazing topic today. We will be talking about Arazzo. So, what is it? Why we should care? And also, what tools are out there and how we can get involved in that. So, let's get started because there's so much to say here. And let's start with a simple question here, Vladimir. How did you get first exposed to Arazzo? How did it happen that you discovered Arazzo and all this world?
I happen to be lucky to be working with the Arazzo author within the company called SmartBear. So we met there, and he was prototyping the idea of having Arazzo or workflows on top of API specification, and that was my first contact with Arazzo. We were talking about it, and sometime later, Frankel Cummins came with a systematic proposal under OpenAPI Initiative, and that's how Arazzo was born later. So that was my first contact with Arazzo.
Mm-hmm. And so, for those who do not know, because curiously, whenever I speak across different audiences, whenever I like hear talk to people and so on, this is something that not many have heard of it. For example, they heard of OpenAPI, they know what Swagger and so on, but this term seems to be very new. So, for someone who has never heard of it, what is Arazzo?
Right. So maybe to understand the Arazzo, you should probably start with OpenAPI, what it is and how it helps us. So OpenAPI is a specification that help us to describe our APIs. It goes deeper than the simple description. It describes the endpoints of the APIs and the operations that we can perform on top of these endpoints. It also describes the data that flow through the operations and how these data are encoded. Then the Arazzo comes into the picture because OpenAPI doesn't really allow us to understand how to actually interact with an API regarding like business workflows. So we have like individual endpoints and operations, but we don't really know what to do when we wanna, for example, in the context of the simple pet store example,
Mhm.
we don't know how to get a pet, order it, and get an order details back. So Arazzo comes in and help us understand the workflows within the individual API, and it builds on top of OpenAPI specification and allow us to understand how to call the API endpoints and operations within them to get the result that we want. For example, ordering a pet from a pet store.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
And it describes it in declarative way, which means that human and machine understands it, both the human and the machine.
So that's also like my next question around that. In that, what was the situation before? So I'm sure that many people have had this problem. So it's not a new problem. It sounds very obvious that we need something. But at the same time, um, Arazzo seems to have here like struck so like the right chord in that now we have something. But before, what were people doing?
There were other like older competing specifications. They were mostly related to the enterprise sphere. So there were specifications that could describe like APIs workflows. But from mostly what I've seen, people try to document the workflows within the API like for human consumption only. So they were trying to describe the workflows within the API within the natural language, basically. But just to be just to clarify, there were older specifications. I haven't used them personally. I only use Arazzo, but there were older specifications. But because nobody knew about them, nobody used them, and it wasn't popularized by the OpenAPI Initiative. Because the Arazzo is under OpenAPI Initiative, it's now become very popular. The toolings are popping up, and the community are injecting themselves into the process of creating quality tooling around Arazzo
Mhm, mhm,
in
mhm.
different languages. That's important for different ecosystems.
And So what you're describing here is, let's say, like classic software engineering, so work with APIs. But what about agents? How can Arazzo here help? Why does it make a difference, or why is it important, or maybe cannot help? So do you see it can work for agents as well?
Yeah, I think Arazzo becomes very OpenAPI and Arazzo together becomes very important in agentic workflows and agents generally. For agent to understand the API and having like an Arazzo specification on top of the API, it makes it understand what are the business workflows that I can follow within this particular OpenAPI specification or this particular API. So I think in that context, it's very important because it allows agent to simply understand what actions, not like what API endpoints I can call, but what actions I can perform or series of actions I can perform on top of API to get to the result that I want, like ordering a pet from the pet store.
Amazing. And we actually have a question so here from Daval, and it says, "Hi, Vladimir. I have reviewed the Arazzo specification, and it appears to be suitable for workflows based on REST APIs. I'm exploring how the Arazzo specification could integrate with our multi-agent system, which aims to connect the input and output of various LLM agents in a multi-step workflow. We also have human interaction in some steps. However, our workflows do not utilize REST APIs. I am not yet familiar with Arazzo Engine, and I look forward to learn more about that." So maybe this is a good as a starting point for now. We have defined, okay, here the Arazzo as a standard, important for structure here our workflows, also important for agents. And we're seeing here a question from the audience that is exactly about working with agents and Arazzo. So let's talk a little bit about the Arazzo Engine. What's the Arazzo Engine, Vladimir?
All right. So maybe I can share the screen.
Yes, please go ahead.
Share screen. I will share entire screen. So let's talk about Arazzo Engine. Arazzo Engine is an open source project which allows people and consumers to generate Arazzo workflows from your OpenAPI specifications and also allows them to run them. So that's the very simple explanation of what Arazzo Engine does. It consists of basically two components, the generator and the runner. Generator generates the Arazzo from the OpenAPI specification. It has like two modes. In first mode, it directly let LLM, large language model, to generate the Arazzo specification for you. And the second mode is that it only allows LLM to identify possible workflows, and then Arazzo generator contains a code, deterministic code, that translate the output of the LLM within some abstract syntax into the actual Arazzo workflow. Then we have a runner, and runner is basically responsible for two things. One is that it can actually run your Arazzo specification file, or it can run operations, individual operations in your OpenAPI file. So it can do these two things. It can handle authentications through the environment variable mappings, and it can also handle command line interface. So you don't need to install it in a very complicated way. You have a command line interface and you can directly use it from a command line. So that's the simple explanation of what Arazzo Engine is. It's basically a model repo containing currently two components. We will be adding more components as the engine evolves, but currently there are two, the runner and the generator.
And for those who are not in all this of the runner, the generator, and also you saw, we could see here how there is also a command line and also here working with code. What would be like the easiest way to get onboarded here, Vladimir? Will it be working with the command line? Will it be writing something with code? Should I start with the engine? Should I start with the runner? So what will be like the simplest and most straightforward way to get started?
I think it depends on the persona. So from the perspective of somebody who just want to use it, the best way to start with Arazzo Engine depends on the use case. If you want to generate Arazzo workflows, for example, the simplest thing to do is to install Arazzo generator through PyPy. That's a Python. This is a Python code, so we distribute the Arazzo generator to the Python registry. So you just install it. There are installation instructions, and then you can just use it as described here. On top of that, we also distribute a public Docker image. So if the command line interface is not something that you like, you can download the Docker image, run it locally. The documentation contains instruction how to do that. And the Docker image also exposes an API. So you can connect to it through your application and use its API to actually get generated Arazzo workflow back. So that's the simplest thing how to start as a user with the generator. Then you have the runner. The story is basically the same. You just install the Arazzo runner from the Python registry, or you use the UVX tool to install it, and you can basically use it from the command line directly after the installation. It doesn't have a Docker image or anything like that. You just use it as a command line utility. And then there is a perspective of developers. So the developers that want to understand how it works or want to contribute. And the easiest way to start there is to get into the Arazzo Engine repository, clone the repo, fork the repo, and clone the repo, and start playing with your favorite IDE or editor. We have documentation for each runner in the generator about development setup. So just look for development, and here are like complete instructions what to do to set it up locally if you are a developer.
Yes, that's here fascinating, and I see here the unlimited. Let me hear. I want to share the following here, Vladimir. So with that, in that, often what I see as well. So it is that, for example, so I was talking to here on a webinar recently, not long ago, and so people they tell me, hey, one of the problems with, for example, doing agents is that they can be brittle, they can hallucinate. It is maybe like easy when I have maybe like one step or maybe with a one tool, but then once I have multi tools, once I have multi steps, it can get very complicated and very convoluted. And are there here any type of like features, tools, or just the characteristics of Arazzo or the Arazzo engine that can help mitigate these problems? Is there something that if someone is having these struggles with hallucination with their agents, they can maybe take inspiration or make use of Arazzo or the Arazzo engine and get better results?
Yes, sure. So for example, the generator is using LLM to basically get you back the workflow file. I can actually guide you through that, how to achieve it. And we have a special prompts that are embedded within the generator that decrease the hallucination and increase the quality of the output of the Arazzo specification. Of course, it's not perfect because it's still undeterministic LLM generation, but we're working hard to make it more and more deterministic so that what it outputs makes more and more sense as the time goes on. So I can maybe show examples of the generator and how it works, how the LLM is involved, the different modes that are there. And yeah, should I go with that?
Yes, please. Yes, it will be really good because so one of the challenges is exactly that, for example, now we saw how to install it, how to use that, but then how to get started with some examples that will be very interesting.
Yeah. And using the generator generally is better than trying trying to feed the ChatGPT or any other LLM with the OpenAPI specification and expecting the result, because like our prompts are are already like optimized for different LLMs that the generator can use, and with the purpose of trying to get the best result that we can. Okay, now I switch to my IDE. Can you see my IDE?
Yes, yes.
All right, so we start with the generator, and we try to generate some workflows. I will use the well-known Swagger pet store fixture. So this is basically an OpenAPI file. It looks like this in JSON format. It's not very nice, but when we render it, it looks more nice. There are some operations that allows to create pets, retrieve them, and order them through the store. So it's very simple API. Let's get back to our generator. So I put my pet store file here. I formatted it nicely so that we can see how it looks like. Basically the same file as I just showed you rendered.
The code is a little bit small, Vladimir, so I don't know if you can like zoom it in and so on, so it might be easier for some who have like small screens.
I'm not sure. I'm on Linux currently, and it's
the challenges. Okay, now it's zooming in. Yes, it's zooming in. Yeah,
does it work?
I think it's more legible. Yes. So it's
maybe if I can somehow increase the
font size, maybe. Yes.
Font size. I haven't done that before. Let's try. Font size. It's here, and we can try 20. No, that's too much. 20. Let's try. It's better?
Yeah, now it's much more legible. Thanks.
All right. So here is a simple pet store OpenAPI specification. It's written in version 3.4, and it describes the pet store API. Now we can get into generator. Like I have the repo locally cloned. I followed the development setup to install all the dependencies, and I prepared some commands that we can now follow. So the easiest one is we can directly tell generator to generate an Arazzo workflow from our pet store JSON, and the output should go into the pet store Arazzo JSON. So let's see what it does. It creates a context for an LLM. Special prompting is applied, and now we're waiting for the result, what it's gonna output. So we have some warnings. That's not unusual. He tries to do the best as he can. And you see that we generated an Arazzo workflow file. So we generated it through the, like I mentioned before, the generator has two modes. One is that we let LLM directly generate the Arazzo, but this time I use this simple command. So it created like an intermediary structure that looks like this, which LLM tries to understand what the abstract operations could be, and it uses this abstract JSON format to provide information for us, and we use a deterministic code to build Arazzo specification from it. So it's like two-step process, and the result is an Arazzo workflow. Sometimes there are hallucinations within the parameters or inputs, but mostly it got the job done. So we can see if we fold it, we collapse all, and it identified 3 different workflows within the pet store OpenAPI. One is the adoption workflow, so you adopt the pet from the store, or you can buy it, but there is an adoption mechanism, so it identified it correctly. And there is some user account management, so it identified that as well, updating the users and the profile. And then it identified a simple pet update workflow, which basically retrieves retrieves a pet and updates it. Okay, so this is the first mode. I'll just clean it up and let's go forward. So on top of generating the Arazzo specification, the generator can also validate it. So if I just generate it again, I can run the validation so that you are sure that you are producing a valid result. It doesn't necessarily mean that what it generated makes perfect sense. You still have to review it. Sorry. And now we run the validator, and it tells that the specification that it produced is completely valid. Right. Let's move forward. So the generator has an advanced mode, and it allows you to further prompt what you want to achieve. So this is a pet store, and I created a simple prompt that allows me to specify that I'm interested in buying a pet, and I describe how I want to achieve that. So I want to find all the pets that are available or with a specific status, but I'm interested in available, but we get to that later. We pick a first pet and we place an order and retrieve the order details. So this is the command to achieve that. And again, LLM does its work. I'm using Gemini in this case as a provider. And let's see the result. Collapse everything again. And identified additional workflows. Like we have 3 workflows again, but specifically I ask for this pet adoption workflow or buying workflow, and it focused specifically on that and tried to get this right, get this part right the most. So you can see we have a specific steps: finding available pets by status, placing an order, that's basically translation of my instructions, and getting an order details.
Yes. And here we have a question from the audience that's a bit connected to that. It is basically that how easy is to incorporate custom code and workflows after the Arazzo generator has created the code from the specification? Will Arazzo runner be able to execute that custom code? And I see this a little bit less like in practice, right? Because now here, Vladimir, you're showing us this pet store as an example. But then, of course, very often it is that we already have some processes, we already have some APIs, maybe we already have some agent workflows in place with some other technologies or some other standards. So how here we can either like incorporate this into the Arazzo standard or the other way around, or having a hybrid?
I'm not sure I understand the question completely. Are we talking about that we generated something and now we're looking into how to actually run it?
Well, it's more, let's say that we already have some process in place, we already have some workflow, maybe not necessarily with so here at Arazzo, but we have a workflow that we wrote, like a YAML or another JSON or something else, right? This already exists somehow. And then now we want to adopt it for Arazzo. Then what's here the migration? Do we need to like rewrite it completely? The runner has some tooling for taking existing workflows and converting it into Arazzo, or what's the way here forward when we already have some process and we need to have it like Arazzo compliant?
Okay, so the question is that we have some workflow defined in, for example, proprietary format or another specification, and we want to use a generator to generate a valid workflow for us, right? So that's my understanding of the question, and it goes back to the comment that I showed, that you can specifically insert, like there is a workflow description option, and we can specifically insert this context, the entire workflow that the person might already have here as a parameter, basically, to the LLM, and see how the LLM deals with it. So it's just another parameter that we assign to the LLM, and the output is always going to be like Arazzo workflow specification. But this is the mechanism that allows to put additional context. We don't have like any specific migration tools or anything like that. Like we use LLM to understand what was already there and how to get to Arazzo specification. And this is the best option or best way that Arazzo Engine or Arazzo Generator can offer to achieve that goal, if it makes any sense.
So if I got it right, so first there needs to be like an intermediate step where, for example, I make use of LLMs that convert my existing workflow into something that is like Arazzo similar, and then after that I can use it on the generator itself. So there is no, let's say, like I just feed it in the generator or in the runner, and somehow I get now Arazzo workflows.
Yes. So if you have something, even if it's a code, if you can generate something that you can feed to the generator as a text, it helps the generator to understand what you already have and apply it to generating a Arazzo workflow from an OpenAPI specification. That is the current capability of the generator that we have within the engine.
Yes, and so it's more common that people have already complex applications, complex agentic workflows, and so on. So is there like a migration path that you can recommend? So I don't know if like one can maybe like divide and conquer and take like smaller blocks and convert that first into Arazzo, or convert everything to Arazzo. So how would you go about that? You've been working with Arazzo already for some time. You're also like a very experienced software engineer. So if you were to convert a very complex workflow into Arazzo, how would you go about?
Nah, that's a very good question. Well, that workflow can be described either in natural language or in some specific format or the DSL, like a domain-specific language. So we can always use some kind of LLM to help us translate it into an Arazzo. It's not going to be perfect, but it will get 80% done, and we need to like review it manually. So that's something I would do. I would always use like some kind of LLM to help me. If it's embedded within the code, the migration part might be a bit stiffer. We would first need to understand how the code functions and then generate some context for an LLM from that code. You can always, for example, if you have a running application and at least you have some logging, you can take the logging output and put it as a context for an LLM to try to translate it into the Arazzo workflows. I haven't done migration of like workflows before, so I'm just cooking now what I would do.
Yes.
But we want to use like LLM because it doesn't necessarily get you 100% result, but it gets you 70-80%, and you spend only 20% of the time getting the rest of the things done or correct them. So yeah, that's how I would approach it probably. There might be a more deterministic way. So if you have something that is structured like a YAML or JSON file, there might be a one-time translation, writing a one-time translation tool that helps with that. So if you want fully deterministic results, but the input needs to be structured then.
And now you're mentioning using LLMs as a helper for converting this, but often LLMs hallucinate, and also my experiences, especially with like longer outputs, it will truncate. So for example, they might get lazy and they might have, for example, like a JSON that's compliant, but inside the attributes, it might have like shorter version, or for example, it will not complete. It will, for example, leave the JSON keys out, etc. So as a result, it can be that either the JSON object is not compliant, or it looks like it's compliant, but the content inside makes no sense. Does the generator or the runner has some diagnostic tooling or anything such that if I'm converting my workflows from something to Arazzo using LLMs, I can verify if that makes sense?
Yeah, so under the hood, the generator does try to parse the underlying OpenAPI specification, either it's JSON or YAML. So there is a deterministic algorithm that tries to parse the input. If it fails, then the overall process of generating the Arazzo workflow will fail. But we have like a different compensating mechanism in the Arazzo generator that tries to fix the corrupted JSON or YAML files. So there is like a deterministic correcting mechanism that tries to do the best with your OpenAPI specification before it's fed to the LLM. And then after the generator outputs the Arazzo workflows or the Arazzo specification, we run it again through the deterministic JSON and YAML parsing toolings to see if the result is correct, and even through the validator that I've showed here. Like if I run it, so on top of getting the well-formed JSON and YAML, we get the result that the Arazzo is actually valid. Being valid doesn't necessarily mean that it's logically valid, but it's more like a structurally valid. So there are mechanisms within the generator to handle this.
Yes. And also at Agentic, we have the Agentic Open APIs as a repository with so thousands of APIs and also workflows. I don't know if you can walk us through here, Vladimir. If we can take here from the repositories on workflow and here run it on the runner and so on. So that will like a really good way to show, because we really have some very interesting workflows there with very common enterprise tools. So it'll be fascinating to see how it works in live.
All right. So I will probably stay with the Petster
All right, yeah.
example.
Yep.
But let me first show we have a Agentic public APIs repository.
Exactly.
So for at this point, yeah, go ahead.
I want to say, just for those who do not know, so this repository has over 1,500 APIs, the most popular ones for B2B enterprise, and also hundreds of workflows that one can pretty much, as we see now, almost like copy paste and use that on here our runner. So please go ahead, Vladimir. I'm super excited about it.
Yeah. So Agentic maintains something called Agentic Public APIs, or we call it OAK, Open Agentic Knowledge Base. And it's basically a repository containing different OpenAPI specification and the workflows that are generated on top of that specifications. So if you go to APIs OpenAPI, you can find a lot of important OpenAPI files here. You can maybe there is a favorite API of yours there. There is a lot of them, as Rod mentioned, 1,500 I think at this point. We try to when we import these OpenAPI specifications, we try to correct them, because not all OpenAPI documents are up to standards. So we try to correct them so that they actually work. And on top of these APIs, so you can see the structure, there is a version of the API, and there is an actual OpenAPI document that describes the API. And so on top of these APIs, there is a workflow directory. We generate with the generator, we try to identify the possible workflows within those OpenAPI files. So for example, for 1Password, we generated an Arazzo workflow using the generator and the original OpenAPI file. And we try to identify some workflow that make sense when the agent looks at it and reads the summary, the description. And when it does something that relates to this 1Password API, it can automatically use this defined workflow and process or go ahead with its work and use this workflow to actually execute the operation. That consists of multiple steps, of course. Yep, so this is the org, or the Agentic Public APIs, and the generator and runner, how it fits in. So the generator generates it, basically. It generates the APIs and the workflows, and the runner runs them. We have a process here within this repository. So in order to import your favorite OpenAPI or API. It currently only supports OpenAPI as a input, no GraphQL or other types of API description formats. So it's currently only OpenAPI. And if you want to import your API and know where the OpenAPI file is located, you just create an issue, put the URL of the OpenAPI file here, add some metadata, and it does all the job for you. It generates pull request that looks like this, which contains the corrected and imported OpenAPI file. Then, if you want to generate a Arazzo workflows on top of that, we again have an issue template. So it's this one. And again, it's URL based. So you put a URL of the OpenAPI file that is already within the Agentic public APIs, assign some metadata and some additional context if you need to or want to, and it again create a PR with generated workflow, which needs to be reviewed and merged into the Agentic public APIs repo. So that's the current process and the data around this repository. It's centric to the Agentic company, and the Agentic uses and understands all the APIs within this directory. Let's call it the directory or knowledge.
And Vladimir, if I see there a workflow that is relevant for me, that I like it, then how do I go about and make use of this on the generator, on the runner? So I click on the repository and I copy paste that, or how does it work?
Right. So currently it works like, I will go further with the story. So we generated a workflow here with the pet store. Currently, the runner cannot run specification from the URL. It only can run it from a local file. So if you want to use any API from this local or from this repository, so you just go ahead, download your OpenAPI Arazzo file as a local file to your file system. We have an issue. I actually created it so that we can process URLs as well. Maybe a community member will pick up on that issue. So currently you have to download the file from the OAK, from the Agentic Public APIs repo, and the runner allows you to immediately run this file. So I prepared, here is my petstore file, which we already talked about. Here is the generated Arazzo workflow. And so let me switch to runner. And I prepare comments. So we let a generator to identify the workflows. So I prepared the command that actually uses the Arazzo runner. It executes the workflow from petstore Arazzo JSON, which the generator provided for us, or we download it from our Agentic public APIs repository. Every workflow is identified by a unique ID. That's Arazzo specification thing. And in our case, it's pets adoption workflow that we talked about. The LLM called it like that. I leave it like that because it's either buying or adoption. It doesn't really matter. And there is an input. So we only want pet that is available in the store, and we want just a single pet. So if I run this command against our Arazzo workflow file, you can see that the runner does its job, and it was actually executing all the steps that we talked before. So we are trying to find the available pets. We find the first pet that is available and place an order for it. And we get an order details after the order had been placed. Here we have a dump of the data. So we see that the pet was retrieved, the order was created with the pet ID, and then the order data has been dumped here as well, which is here. On top of that, you can also run a specific operation from the OpenAPI files. So the original petstore file has different operations. For example, this endpoint, pet ID, has a get operation, so you can retrieve the pet by its ID. And the operation is tagged with, again, unique operation ID. So you can actually run on top of Arazzo file, you can also run an OpenAPI file. That's an added benefit of Arazzo Runner. So if I run it, we get dump of the data, and it's actually HTTP status code of 200, and we see that we got a path information back. So the Arazzo Runner is capable of running OpenAPI specifications. It can act as a client to OpenAPI specifications directly, and on top of that, it runs Arazzo workflow files as well. So this was a quick demonstration of how the runner works. You can use it conveniently through command line interface.
And more broadly, we have another questions here from the audience. That is, hi Vladimir, do you think we'll see a time when companies like Zapier or Anything adopt Arazzo to back their workflow specifications? And I guess this comes also like the more question on like the general adoption that you might be seeing from companies and the general developers and so on.
If the Zapier expose it, they would actually expose their business, like the main business that they do, and that's the integration between the services. So I don't think it makes sense maybe for Zapier, but it would be nice if they would do it, because then we would actually could use it directly by the runner, connected to the agents, and understand how integrations click between each other. So I can see companies will be adopting Arazzo more and more, because it gives them understanding of how their business processes are actually functioning in declarative way, instead of having a like application code, which is the only source of truth. Instead of that, you can have an Arazzo workflows, which describes the business workflows within the business entity. And then build code on top of that, like the design first approach. That would be nice if we get there, like we are trying to get there with OpenAPI specification. So I am the big proponent of design first approach. So you first write OpenAPI specification, and it acts as an infrastructure for everything else that you do, for producing code, for testing, for mocking, for whatever. I would imagine the Arazzo workflow would fit into this paradigm as well, but it needs time. It needs time, because even with OpenAPI, we're not there yet, in a sense that the OpenAPI specification is currently being used more as a fragment generated from the code than a primary infrastructure to drive everything else. It will take some time to get there in OpenAPI and with Arazzo as well. But it would be great if companies would be exposing their workflows, their business workflows, through the Arazzo specification, because that would allow us to deprecate the generator. And we would have everything ideal situation and everything up to date and working.
And being a bit of like playing devil's advocate here, when would you say it's a bad idea for a company to adopt Arazzo? When is it that they're not ready? So far we only hear positive things, but what could we hear like the negatives, right? Not everything can be perfect.
Can you repeat that? I lost you for a second.
Yes, that so far we have heard positive arguments about Arazzo, why we need it, why it's great. But here, taking the other side, when will you say a company should not be using Arazzo? This is not for them. When will you disadvise working with Arazzo?
I don't think there is a use case why not using it. Even if a company has a private API, the Arazzo can help them to understand the business processes within that company and utilize some on-prem solutions for that, so they cannot go public. I understand it, but I don't see a case where the Arazzo may damage anything. I think it can only help. I'm trying to think about the use case where you are a company, you have only a private API, and that's it. You have a code that works with it, right? But if you have OpenAPI specification describing the API, and then you have Arazzo workflows that describe the business workflows,
Yes.
then the onboarding and the understanding of the business entirely would be expedited, I think, significantly. So I currently don't see like any negatives of using it or having it. It's an open standard. It's not backed by any company. It's not like evolved by any company. There is no harm using it, and there is no danger like of it being abandoned because the company decides we want to close the standard. It's maintained under the Linux Foundation, under OpenAPI Initiative. So it's completely an open standard, and you can decide to use it or not. And you can be sure that it will be there in a couple of years. Maybe OpenAPI is for us for more than 12 years, I think, now. And it's just getting more and more traction.
That's amazing. And so also we know that the Arazzo Engine is part of Hacktoberfest this year, and it's starting soon. So maybe you can take us through like your favorite issues or things you like to see people working on, or things that you say, hey, this is not yet here outlined, but this could be like a good idea to work on. So here it will be really good for those who are excited about Hacktoberfest, they want to contribute, and they're looking for a way to get in.
Sure. So Arazzo Engine is a standard open source repo. It's licensed under Apache 02 license. Everything is driven through the code of conduct, which is a contributor covenant 3.0, is a standard way of maintaining order within the open source project. And we have a contributing guideline, which you can directly access through these tabs here, just below the list of the files. So here it describes how to jump in, how the development process works, how we imagine you could be doing the branching model, committing, and making a pull request. The development setup, as I already mentioned before, is for every package is documented under the development section header. So this applies for generator and a runner. And we have prepared a set of issues along with Rod. They are labeled. Every issue is now labeled. It's either related to runner or the generator. And additional label that is applied is a good first issue. So you can just click on that and it would filter all the issues. There are good jumpstart working or contributing to the Arazzo engine. As a maintainers, we will try to address your PR as soon as possible and merge it and release it so that it's out there for the people to use in no time. As part of the Hacktoberfest, as Rod mentioned, we opted in by using the Hacktoberfest topic on the repo, which basically rolls us in automatically. Yep.
And in terms of issues or topics, where would you say, hey, we need here support, anyone who is enthusiastic, this would be like a really good idea to contribute, anything that you can like point people to?
Like talking about individual issues, you mean?
Or in general, like let's say like the general vision. So you have like a good overview of the repository. So I'm sure that you have this idea of saying, hey, this is like a good idea, but I just don't have time. I wish someone could spend some more time on this.
Yeah. So I think we already mentioned it. The good thing would be to add support for loading the Arazzo description from the URL, which I already mentioned.
Yeah.
That would be great because that would allow us to reference Arazzo workflow files from the Agentic public APIs repo. So that would be great to have. Another thing that I still need to create issue for is when I run the Arazzo runner here, you can see that we are basically only using the Python logging to understand what's happening and then dump some data. So it would be great if somebody would jump in and try to implement like overview how the actual requests are and responses are flowing, through the runner. I mean, like seeing the headers, seeing the payload, seeing the parameters. That would increase the experience of using the runner significantly, because you would understand what's happening more than you currently do. You can understand what's happening now, but as you see, it's mostly Python logging and some data dumps. But seeing like actual headers, payloads, and request bodies, that would be a game changer here. I'll create an issue after this meeting. I just thought about it during the day, so I didn't have time to create an issue. But that would something that would be nice to have.
Yes.
Another thing that is good for people to enhance how Arazzo Engine function is to jump in and try to fix our types. I mean the Python types. We have them there, but we don't enforce the type constraints currently, because we need to increase the quality of those types. So anybody that is fluent in Python, we would really appreciate fixing this. It can be held by the LLM for sure, but it needs a human touch to get things right.
Yes.
Another thing is test cases. Yeah, these are the issues that Rhoda actually created. So we need more and more test cases describing how, for example, the mechanism within the generator that I mentioned, that self-correcting mechanism for the OpenAPI spec, we have this complicated correction using complicated regular expressions. So covering that with the test would be nice as well.
Yes. One question here for the audience, Vladimir, is that if you know or you're aware, or maybe you believe that the Arazzo specification will ever have an input-output from an LLM agent. So how will LLMs be specified in the format?
Can you ask one more time so that I understand correctly?
Yes. So if in the Arazzo specification, LLM inputs and outputs will ever become like a native, so like property or definition and so on, or in general, how will this be specified?
The inputs and outputs for the Arazzo specification when the agent is using them. Do I understand it correctly?
Well, for a LLM model. So for example, how do I tell to Arazzo, hey, this step is a call to an LLM model. So this step is a call to like Gemini, step is a call to, so here GPT-5 and so on.
Okay. I understand the question. I'm not sure if I can answer that competently. Like Arazzo is more about APIs. So you have an agent that, instead of understanding how other agent connects with it, you have, like, we here in Agentic have something called a standard agent. It's looking at a Agentic public APIs repository, and it tries to understand what it needs to do from the user description, what the user wants to do, and it tries to find an appropriate API and workflow which you can use and get the job done. I'm not sure how other agents would connect to that. It's a bit different paradigm, but I'm trying to answer the question as best I can. Hopefully it did answer it, but yeah, that's the best I can do for that question. Sorry.
Yes. And before we wrap up, are there any general tips that you can give to Hackoctober Fest participants? So you've been here involved in all this open source movement for quite some time. So any hints, any tips that you say, hey, for those who are doing this for the first time, What are things that they should pay attention to? What things they should avoid? Best practices? Any pointers?
Right. So even when you're not familiar with the coding itself, you can still contribute by fixing our documentation, making it better, fixing the typos that we might have, or fixing the nonsensical sentences that we might produce. So even like no code contribution are very welcome. If you know how to code, then we created this list of issues that you can actually start with. What I would not recommend is, from what I've seen in past, people try to score a PR just by reformatting a single line. So that is not something that we will, accept just for the purpose of accepting it. The contribution need to make sense and need to be like something that actually enhances significantly or not significantly, or at least partially, any part of the engine at all. But like empty contributions, we just do reformatting of text or documentation with no added value. These will probably be rejected.
Great. Well, I'd say that with this, we can really wrap up so we're seeing how it's very easy to get started with the Arazzo engine, the Arazzo workflow and standards. They are really something that every company should be using, as you were saying here, Vladimir. It helps understand their processes. And also, it's so easy to get started with the Arazzo engine. And for those who are interested in Hackoktoberfest, we have here many issues, also new ideas that you were here sharing that we'll have soon as issues as well. And just that pretty much is open for everyone, right? To contribute here in Hackoktoberfest and join us there.
Yep. Everybody is welcome to contribute.
Amazing. And I'm sure that as well here, Vladimir, so people might have questions or they might be curious and so on. Where can they find you? How is it the best way to reach out?
I'm available on LinkedIn, and let me see, I'm available on the email. So my email on GitHub is public as well. So it's vladimir.gorej, gmail.com. So you can connect with me through GitHub issues, GitHub comments, whatever, you can mention me. And then I'm available on LinkedIn as well, where we can chat real time.
Great. And of course, on our Agentic Discord community, where everyone's invited to join.
Of course.
That as well.
No, and that as well.
Yes. So thanks so much, Vladimir, for joining, and for everyone for tuning in. And join us next week for another webinar where we'll be discussing the standard agent, and very innovative and a really interesting open source library, and how you can get started and contribute there. So see you everyone next week. And thanks so much, Vladimir.
Thank you for having me. Bye, everybody. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.